Here's a little bit about carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. And we're going to start off with the definition of inorganic and organic. When we're talking about organic substances, you're really referring to things that contain carbon. We consider ourselves carbon-based life forms, so this is a very important term to remember. We're primarily talking about large macromolecules like carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, nucleic acids, all of which contain carbon. But there are some smaller molecules that contain carbon, but we wouldn't consider organic, and that's just the way that scientists have defined things. So one of the main exceptions is carbon dioxide, which we would consider an inorganic substance. And so inorganic is referring to something that lacks carbon, but there are a few exceptions. You should know that carbonate ions, carbon dioxide, are such exceptions. Okay, if you're looking at the main macromolecules of life, if we use a burger here, there's a lot of big vocabulary words, so watch out for this. The best way to think about this is that large molecules are like big giant Lego structures that are made up of small individual Lego pieces. So if you're talking about the big molecules, we're talking about proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, but they are all made up of tiny building blocks. And these tiny building blocks are specific to the macromolecule that we are talking about. So for each one of these, let's start with proteins, also called polypeptides. These molecules are obviously, if we're talking about a sandwich, they can be found in meat. Another big molecule is called carbohydrates, also known as polysaccharides, includes things like starch and cellulose and glycogen. So carbohydrates in this burger are primarily, we're talking about the bun, and also in the vegetables as well. Lipids, aka triglycerides, are another large molecule. Those are basically fats, and fats are found in the cheese and also in the grease right here that's in this napkin. And then finally, one more big molecule called nucleic acid. If you've heard of DNA, that's what the Na stands for, nucleic acid. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. And another nucleic acid is RNA. Each of these big molecules you're going to be seeing a little bit more later on, but for now, proteins and polypeptides. So we are actually talking about, well, nucleic acids are found in anything that contain cells, which is pretty much all of this burger that's over here. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Amino acids. You'll be learning about that a lot. Some examples of proteins are the proteins that are in your hair and in your nails, keratin, collagen. Enzymes are proteins. Hormones are proteins. That means all of those things are actually made up of amino acids. Carbohydrates, like starch, are made up of smaller molecules, like called monosaccharides. Glucose is an example of a monosaccharide. So glucose is one of the most famous examples. You have fructose and ribose and some other things. Some big ones, big carbohydrates here are like starch. Okay. Lipids are made up of glycerol and fatty acids. So remember, glycerol structure, remember, is OOO glycerol. And each glycerol can join up with one fatty acid. Finally, nucleic acids are made up of small units called nucleotides, and we're going to be learning about that in more detail. So a lot of big vocabulary words there, so watch out for that. Okay, some important functions of lipids. This is pretty easy. You know that if you consume excess lipids, it gets stored in various parts of your body. For me, recently, at the age of 33, it has been around my waist, and it's getting more and more difficult to find pants that fit my strange proportions. I know what you're thinking. Your proportions are fine. There's no problem. My legs are not too long, and my waist is getting bigger. There's only one size of pants in Uniqlo that I can find these days. Energy storage, lipids. That's one primary function, energy storage. It stores excess energy. When I need it, if I haven't eaten for a long time, then it starts to get burnt off. And that's when people talk about burning fat or trying to lose weight. Number 2 is heat insulation. That is a good thing. The more fat you have on your body, the more you are capable of keeping heat inside, and the more difficult it becomes to lose that heat. Therefore, you may notice that Sumo wrestlers who have a lot more fat in their body probably tend to, well, actually, I've seen a few of them in McDonald's before. I'm not even joking. And when they're walking outside, they're sweating a lot. I'm not sweating. I have a large surface area to volume ratio. They have smaller surface area to volume ratio because they have much more volume compared to the surface area on their body. So they end up sweating a lot more. One more function of lipids is buoyancy. It actually helps you to float. So back to sumo wrestler again. Sumo wrestler with lots of lipids, you would think they're bigger, more mass, so maybe they're easier to sink in water. Not the case at all. Fats are actually less dense than water, and so they're going to end up floating a lot more easily than somebody like me. All right, floating. The one good thing to compare between carbohydrates and fats is that actually, if you compare carbs and fats, fats actually contain more energy, gram per gram. If you compare them, you get almost double or more than double the amount of energy by eating 1 gram of fat compared to 1 gram of carbohydrates. That's fantastic. So why don't we just concentrate on eating fats and forget about all the sugar? Well, fats are very hard to digest. They are non-polar. They don't like water. Our digestive system is primarily water, and so you end up with a big problem with fats not able to dissolve in our liquid digestive system and also transferring that energy through our bloodstream, which is primarily water as well. So you've heard of problems that can arise when you have too much fat built up in our system. It can actually clog arteries and cause all kinds of additional problems. So watch out for that. Carbohydrates, we crave them. Starch, pasta, rice. It's hard to go on a carb diet, a non-carb diet, and not feel very, very, very hungry. We need these sugars to stay alive. That's a fact. So think twice before you go on a low-carb diet. Remember, vegetables are still carbohydrates, so you don't want to ever get rid of all starchy foods and all your vegetables. So it's kind of a misnomer to say full, like, non-carb diet if you're still eating vegetables, but don't be silly. Okay, lots of different terms you need to know here. IB is asking that you are able to name many of these types of carbohydrates, and we learned that the breakdown, the unit of carbohydrates, the individual units, we call them monosaccharides. Okay, monosaccharides. Remember, saccharides sounds like sugar. That's how I remember that. Now, it gets a little more tricky because carbohydrates or polysaccharides are big units. Monosaccharides just refer to individual units. I know because I like glucose. I know that glucose and fructose and ribose are monosaccharides, but you can also create disaccharides by just connecting two of them together. It changes their properties slightly and the level of sweetness as well, so you got to watch out for a few of these things. So here's a big table. I'm just going to run through this really quickly, giving you some examples. 3 monosaccharides are glucose, galactose, and fructose. There are more, but these are their primary functions or uses, you could say. So glucose, our main blood sugar. Galactose is found in dairy products, and fructose is actually found in honey and onions. Fructose is extremely sweet compared to the other ones. A couple disaccharides. Maltose is a malt sugar made up of 2 glucose molecules bound together, and we call that maltose. It's a disaccharide, di meaning 2. Lactose, if you take 1 galactose and combine it with 1 glucose, you end up with lactose, and lactose is the main sugar that's found in milk. There are many people who are lactose intolerant. If you have ever eaten tons of ice cream and had a bad stomachache afterwards, or drink a certain amount of milk and you get some bad stomach aches, diarrhea, you can't digest, you have a lot of gas, that could be one of the things. Lactose intolerance could develop later in life as well too, so watch out. No big deal. It's actually quite common in Asians. Sucrose is another disaccharide found in sugar beets, and if it's composed of 1 glucose and 1 fructose molecule. Finally, we get to our polysaccharides. Polysaccharides, you've heard of starch. It's the storage carbohydrate in plants. Glycogen is the storage carbohydrate in animals. That's why we have a liver here. Glycogen is stored in the liver. And cellulose is found in plant cell walls. An important thing here, we need glucose, and glucose is actually found in starch, right? Starch is a bunch of glucose molecules that are bound together. So what we do is we eat starchy foods, break it down into individual glucose molecules, and then these glucose molecules then, while they're flowing through our bloodstream, if there's too much glucose in our bloodstream, it actually gets stored as glycogen in the liver. And that's a function of our pancreas. It produces a hormone that helps us to actually do that. And you may have heard of it. It is called insulin. Okay, insulin will lower the blood sugar level by telling your liver to take up extra glucose and store it as glycogen. Okay, a few more functions of carbohydrates here. Glucose, our main source of energy. In animals, we're talking about lactose is a milk sugar, source of energy to young. Glycogen is used for short-term storage of energy in the liver. We just talked about that. In plants, carbohydrates are fructose is a source of energy. Sucrose is a transport carbohydrate and also for storage of energy. Sugar cane plants, sugar beets, a lot of the energy is stored as sucrose. And cellulose you must have heard of before. It is the primary component of plant cell walls. Animal cells don't have that extra cell wall around the outside. Cellulose is the primary carbohydrate that's found in plant cell walls. So a lot about carbohydrates. The IB wants you to know a lot about carbohydrates. And so think about that next time you consider going on a low carb diet. Here's a quick practice question to consider. What is the difference between galactose and lactose? So make sure you pause the video because the answer is coming up in a second. So pause the video, read through this, take 90 seconds, cross out the wrong answers, and try to choose the correct one. Okay, pause. Here comes the answer. Alright. It's from 2011. And I think that is about it. Alright, thank you very much. Hope you had a great day. How do I end this? I don't know. Uh-oh.